Hello and welcome to Catamount Community Connection, our weekly public affairs program here at Catamount Radio. Thanks to everyone, by the way, that continues to tell me they do tune in and hear it on all 5 of our radio stations. I'm Brian Collamore, your host, and each week we try to focus on a little bit different topic. Today we are very happy. I should mention also before we get started, our show is brought to you by the Rutland County Agricultural Society, which has brought you the Vermont State Fair forever. We're looking forward to the 180th Vermont State Fair here at Rutland, right at the fairgrounds, and that'll be coming up next August 2026. And we thank them for their continued support of the program. Devon Neary will be joining us this morning or this evening, depending on when you're tuned in. He is the executive director of the Rutland Regional Planning Commission. And just recently, in fact, it was this past week, there was a briefing for all the area legislators and other concerned people about Act 181 and what happened with that, kind of a summary where we're headed next. I know I did take part in the survey, and then we've talked with Devon in the past about how they interacted with as many people as they could, so they got a pretty good idea of how people feel. But I was not able to attend the briefing this past week. The chamber had a mixer the same night, and part of that went to the Christmas Fund, which is an annual event here for about 53 years at the station. So I had to go and represent the station, and I was unable to get to the briefing. I don't know. First of all, Devon, great to see you as always.
Hey, Brian, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here again.
Did we have a pretty good turnout, or were there other people with other commitments?
Yeah, it's a tough time of year. There's no doubt. And we knew we had to jam this in ahead of the session to try to capture as many folks as we could. There were probably 40 or 50 folks on the call. You know, this was a all legislator briefing, so we had legislators from all corners of the state attend that. It was presented by VAPTA, which is the Vermont Association of Planning and Development Agencies, which is sort of that umbrella for regional planning commissions. And we had presentations from Bennington County, Northeast Kingdom, Chittenden County, and Rutland to try to show that diversity and how we're sort of trying to customize these maps and plans for each region while having some statewide consistency, which is a new thing. So, you know, there's some bumps along the way, and we're trying to learn from the process so far and inform you all, empower you all as legislators to be able to enact reasonable, pragmatic changes to the law to allow us to better do our work, you know.
We are going to convene in a couple of weeks, so by the time this gets on the air, it'll be the 14th of December, and we go back into session on January 6th. So there is a couple-week period of time, of course, Christmas and New Year's in between, where the holidays won't interrupt the normal processes. But it is important, I think, that people pay attention to what the results were of all those surveys, and I know we're going to talk a little bit more about next steps. Mm-hmm. There's I don't want to call it a probationary period, but there's a period of time now where people can look at what was implemented and then comment on it, kind of, right?
That's exactly right. So just to back up for the listeners who aren't aware, because, you know, you and I know all the lingo, and we talk about act numbers and whatever, but Act 181, as a recap, is the first comprehensive reform of Act 250, and it changes from a scale to a location-based jurisdiction. And through that law, regional planning commissions were mandated to have consistent statewide future land use maps, and those future land use maps lay out areas that potentially could be eligible for exemptions to Act 250. Think of our areas with infrastructure like that have water and sewer and dense development, sidewalks, and municipal capacity to take on land use regulations. So in our region, think of Rutland City and Brandon and Fairhaven, those medium-sized towns and up. We want, the state has produced a very aggressive statewide housing target of 40,000 units by 2040 or 2050, and in our region, we're looking at a number between 5,000 and 9,000 units, which is significant considering we add between about 50 and 150 at most a year. So, these maps and the process is new, but the legislature and the Land Use Review Board, which took over for the, Act 250 Commission, is asking us to have these maps ready to go by the end of 2026. I've been on here several times now to talk about our own regional plan update. We started that process back in 2023. So we were already planning to update our maps and our plan because it expires in June. So our crunch on timeline is real because we can't let our plan elapse. If we do, then we lose a lot of ability to have substantial deference, weigh in on Act 250, seek a lot of grant funding. So it's high stakes. But, I'm going to back up and talk less about Rutland County and more about this legislative briefing statewide.
Okay.
So, what this entailed and what you alluded to was the most comprehensive engagement effort by regional planning commissions in our history. Together, all 11 regional planning commissions have held more than 750 events. And, this isn't over a multi-year period. This is really from the beginning of 2025 until now. For some of us who have been doing the work, it's a little bit longer, but that just shows you the scale and the intensity of what we're doing. Of that 750 events, we've been to more than 450 select board meetings and planning commission meetings to really ensure that this is a bottoms-up approach. And I know that's a complaint we hear a lot in Vermont is landowners and businesses feel like a lot of things are top-down. That the legislature, and I paint that broadly. I know that's not you, Brian, and your voting record, but have passed a lot of provisions that make, things more expensive and development difficult. And we're hoping that through this effort, we can overcome some of that. It will not be a silver bullet, right? There are other issues that we need to deal with. But still, I think the point is, we've been working diligently with our communities on these maps to strike this really important balance that for the first time ever in Vermont's history, we are aligning local goals with regional goals and statewide goals and hopefully braiding them together that makes everyone happy. Now, there are winners and losers. That's how the statute is laid out, right? But what we are learning is I spoke about those exemptions because this new Act 250 program is based on tiers. Tier 1 will see those developed areas see some exemptions. Tier 2 is status quo. It's Act 250 as it is today, plus one major component, the road rule, which we've talked about here a lot. And I think there's a lot of concerns about how much of Vermont will be covered by that. That's Act 250 permit required for new driveways or roads of 800 feet or 2,000 feet of a combination. And then there's Tier 3. And that is where people are most concerned. We've held a couple Tier 3 public hearings, or the LURB has at our office over the last several months. And Tier 3 is that new provision, which is critical natural resources. The regional planning commissions have nothing to do with the mapping, right? This is all the LURB and ANR. And this will be a new jurisdiction. It won't add any components or criteria to Act 250, but it will capture basically any development. There are some exemptions that are important, like ag and forestry and, small scale. There's a small buffer within existing building footprints. But, for these rural areas, I think there's a lot of questions of, will I be able to develop on my property? And I think people are concerned, and rightfully so, because there's still a lot of unknowns. And, our concern and what we really relayed in this legislative briefing is we didn't know going into this where the breakdown would be, how much of Vermont would fall into this new Tier 1 category and how much would fall into Tier 3. What we have found so far with our draft maps with Tier 2, and, environmental groups, other folks, stakeholders, have worried this law would be rampant development unrestricted. Well, I'm sorry, folks, but the fact of the matter is, so far, the draft Tier 1 areas result in about 2.5 0.2% of the state of Vermont. We are talking about a tiny, tiny area. So while it's impactful, because before the legacy program for designations was only 0.3% of Vermont, the point is, the more important fact is the interim exemptions for Act 250 that have been going on the last couple of years, that's about 2%. So we haven't grown substantially. Where the rub is, in the law, and I think a lot of people are expecting, is that Tier 3 and Tier 1 will be commensurate land areas in size. However, what the Land Use Review Board so far has proposed in their draft maps is an area of 4.4 to 8.5% of the state of Vermont. That's 2 to 4 times what Tier 1 is looking like. So,
and that would be for Tier 2?
That'd be for Tier 3.
Oh,
those
3.
Critical natural resources. So Tier 2 will be everything else. So think of, really like 90+% of Vermont will fall under Tier 2, which is standard Act 250. So, I don't want to throw the Land Use Review Board under the bus. They have been really tasked with difficult processes to lay out. I think you as a legislature are going to see an ask, hopefully, by the LURB and maybe other groups to delay this Tier 3 mapping, so that gives them more time to do more mapping and more engagement. Because I think landowners are worried that they're not going to know their property is going to fall under Tier 3, and they're going to feel like their property is sort of less valuable as a result. So there's just so much happening right now, and it's impossible for the average person to keep up. It really is. So I think, any delay to give more opportunity for people to weigh in and understand what's happening is a good thing at the end of the day. And as long as we can keep our process going forward, so the benefits of this whole change can stay intact and be realized, because I can tell you, I have heard directly from developers and consultants in Rutland City alone, they're waiting for this law to be enacted and our maps to be done so they can build housing. Like, they're waiting in the wind now so they can get these exemptions. Because, if you can avoid Act 250, that's a lot of time and a lot of money saved.
Yep.
So that's kind of where we're at. I'm happy to answer any specific questions, but we've learned a lot through this process from our towns and stakeholders about what are the priorities in Vermont and what people want to see in their communities.
And just for way of background, and I was here in the state when Act 250 was enacted. Mm-hmm. I had absolutely no interest or desire to know about it back then. I was 20 years old, basically. Mm-hmm. So it passed the legislature in 1970 and signed into law by a Republican governor, Dean Davis, to be fair. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times it's characterized as sort of a left-leaning provision in law or statute. But it was signed into law by a Republican governor, and normally Republican governors don't have that moniker attached to them. Mm-hmm. And I think what was happening, and again, I was at school in 1970, and I do remember when it passed, but if somebody had asked me what that meant, I would have had no idea. Okay?
And I don't think you would have been alone in that.
No. But it focused a lot on the development in ski areas, or at least in associated lands where there may not have been as careful a process of figuring out what sort of impact it was going to have on the environment back then. And so it was seen, I think, as a way to, and I don't think it's any secret, to put a brake on just development all over the place. It was kind of like the Wild West way back when, and anybody could sort of develop and do anything they wanted as long as they owned the land. And that's not true anymore. I think it has reached a point. So that was 1970. And here we are whatever it is, years later.
Yeah, 55 years.
Yeah.
Wild.
It's not the Wild West anymore. And I think if you talk to a lot of people, it has gone way too far the other way. And it's seen by some as sort of a strangling mechanism for future development and growth. And I don't mean to cast this in absolute terms, because I think there's nuances involved. But I think that there was a move with Act 181 to open the door up a little bit more than it has been. Mm-hmm. I think there are 10 criteria that in the old days before LURB, you had to go through the district environmental commissions and you had to answer all these questions. And I can remember when the law was first passed, there was only a couple criteria. Really, it's become sort of this giant thing that keeps sort of repeating and repeating and repeating. And so it's a little bit more difficult now than it was certainly in 1970. Whether we have hit the sweet spot in terms of legislation, I don't know. I think you're right. We'll have to see how things develop in the next session and probably a few sessions after that. I know for a fact that one of the senators who's no longer with us, Dick Sears from Bennington County, when this was finally getting to the floor in the Senate, had proposed to do away or at least change that road rule. And I think you said 800 feet to 2,000.
Yeah, 800 feet of private drive or 2,000 feet of a combination of public road, new public road, and new drive. But the one thing that I think people assume is that this is sort of like there's this 800 or 2,000 foot buffer from existing roads. Well, no, it could be 20 feet off the road and run 800 feet parallel, and you would be Act 250 jurisdictional. Yep. So it's a huge swath. I mean, I get the intent of let's not put these McMansions in rural Vermont in the middle of a forest and fragment that forest. Right. I agree that's not good for foresters, not good for the environment. And the average Vermonter is not building a house out there.
Not
but
with an 800-foot drive.
No, sir. Yeah, that's a plowing nightmare these days. But I think the expansiveness and the shotgun approach is the opposite of how we operate as planners. Custom, strategic, context sensitive. That's how we operate, and it does feel like it's a pretty broad brush that I'm concerned will sort of negate the benefits of the exemptions to some degree. But time will tell, right? This is still very new, and certainly VAPTA is proposing some changes to Act 181. So we at the Rutland Regional Planning Commission were the first one to go through this new pre-application process for our regional plans and future land use maps. And the LURB is responsible for that review, and we held some public hearings, we had site visits, and their response, their official response to our map and plan was more restrictive based on that statutory language than we thought, and we're actually going to lose potentially some Tier 1 eligible areas because our interpretation of the law differed from theirs. And from what I'm hearing on the ground is there's a lot of ambiguity in this law, that each land use category has a couple sentences, and there's some language in there that can be interpreted either way. So I think the LURB, regional planning commissions are all looking for some very minor corrections that would reduce that ambiguity. So we all know exactly what is eligible and what isn't. The other element that we'd like to see change is we have to find an easier process for regional planning commissions to amend their maps and plans. A great example is, to be eligible for these benefits, towns have to have all these requirements. So like zoning and subdivision regs and, flood hazard bylaws, yada, yada. So several of our towns, 4 of which, so Fairhaven, Proctor, Pittsford, Killington, none of them had subdivision regs. So we've been working with them diligently to draft subdivision regs and get them adopted so they're eligible. And luckily, we've been able to do that work, and they will be eligible in time. But who's to say this plan is adopted in June? A town says, hey, we adopted subdivisions in July. We're eligible now. As it currently stands, we would have to go through a 6 to 8 month readoption process for a simple map amendment. And frankly, between the LURB's capacity and Regional Planning Commission capacity, we don't want to spend all our time just going through the motions on these maps and plans. We want to get them enacted, adopted, so the benefit is realized and used. So we want to work with the legislature on that, to be like, is there a process when we can amend them in a minor sort of way that we don't have to go through this huge rigmarole in process? We can streamline things so everyone can get to that yes quicker. So yeah, these are some of the things we think they're minor. That there is an urgency though to get this all done in time, especially for the regions like ourselves and Chittenden that our plans expire in June. So
we're talking with Devon Neary, who's the executive director of the Rutland Regional Planning Commission. I don't know if I characterized the initial or the original intent of Act 250 back in 1970, and then the unfortunate, I call it unfortunate, consequences thereof, where we just continued to add criteria. And I mean, it was actually designed to inhibit development, and it's done a really good job. And so I think for the most part, I think if you explain it to the average Joe or Jill on the street, that back then it made sense to kind of clamp down on just wide open development, but it's reached a point where in order to have any development or to grow, we need to get rid of some of it. And I think in many ways that's what Act 181 was intended to do. And I don't know, I may not have used exactly, but I think I'm speaking the way most people would understand the law. And are we finished? No, I don't think we are. I don't think, as it's true with many statutes, we're never finished because things change. It's not the same landscape, with all due respect, that it was in 1970. And so we always need to go back and see whether a law is working, whether it's harming people or helping people. And if it isn't, then we need to go back and amend it. And so I think that's what we were trying to do. Dick Sears was not successful, by the way, in doing away with the road rule. It did go into effect. So that might be something that, in the Senate, it would be Natural Resources Committee. And in the House, there's an environmental committee now. They kind of broke apart a couple of standing committees. So anyway, it might be something that folks on those committees would want to take a look at. But I appreciate the percentages that you've outlined here, Devon. Tier 1, which is now 2.2% of the total mass area of the state, are areas now where I don't want to say they don't have to worry about Act 250 at all, but many of those requirements don't come into play. And again, the town or municipality that is included in those Tier 1 designations have to have all the other stuff already there so that you're not having to build water and sewer and all that kind of stuff. But it will do away with a lot of the expense and the uncertainty, I think, is the other thing that from a developer, if you're going to invest money in a project, you want to have a little bit of certainty that they're going to get approved and that the timeline is going to be adhered to and it's not going to cost a fortune. So that's that one. Tier 3, I think a lot of people would say between 4 and 5 and 8% of the terrain in Vermont should be, in essence, preserved and not, getting as developed as other areas. It probably still could take a chance at looking at that. And then it's the Tier 2 that's the remainder, some 89, 90% of Vermont, where the Act 250 process is still going to have to be observed. Maybe we can make some tweaks to that and get that number reduced a little bit. I don't know. But anyway, that's the way I see it. And I think a lot of the folks in the legislature do as well. And I think most Vermonters understand that, we don't want polluting our lakes, streams, rivers, whatever. And yet we want to be able to develop and continue to grow and bring people into the state. We are still not where we need to be with population. The more people you have that are here and being productive, the burden of taxes is spread further along, and you don't feel it as much. And we need some new young people with families to move in.
We certainly do. We really, really do. And I think of Kevin Shue and the Vermont Futures Project and trying to get our population grown to 802,000. I think that's what you see with this state VHFA housing target for the state with 40,000 units is try to get there.
And we're at 600 now.
600, yeah, maybe 680 or something, or somewhere around that. And it's not, that's the bulk of that is carried by Chittenden County. Rutland County, our population now in 2020. 60,000 or so is less than it was, and we've had stagnant growth for years. So, 2000 and 2020 shouldn't be the same population for Rutland County, but it is. So we've got work to do here, no doubt.
All right, let's take our first break here on Catamount Community Connection. Again, we're talking with Devon Neary from the Rutland Regional Planning Commission, and we're going to take our break here on Catamount Radio and be back in just a second. We're back on Catamount Community Connection, our weekly public affairs show here on Catamount Radio. I'm Brian Collamore. Happy to have you with us. Thank you for listening. And we are talking today with Devon Neary from the Rutland Regional Planning Commission. We've talked a lot about the work that was done by the 11 planning commissions throughout the state to get input, get information from people, and 750 events and over, actually near 500 meetings with local select boards and other planning commissions to kind of get a sense of where Vermonters want to go with planning. A lot of that has to do with workforce, and that's something certainly that the governor has made a big deal about, is that with the declining population, we don't have enough people that are in that, and I don't know whether it's 25 to 45 or 25 to, is 60 the new 40? They keep telling me that, so I don't know if it is, but
it might be. Yeah.
We need more people that are of working age, whatever that age is.
Yeah, you had mentioned right at the end of the segment about recruiting young folks and retaining young folks, and workforce is the answer, especially when you break this down by income level and mobility. More and more young people who have not gone to college are leaving Vermont because they just can't find a job. It's not affordable. So this is super important in that calculus to try to grow our population is, hey, let's recruit and retain young people through workforce opportunities. The Regional Planning Commission years ago, we took over sort of the stewardship of the Rutland Region Workforce Investment Board, which had long-standing with the Sophomore Summit and Real Careers and working with high schools in the region. And unfortunately, COVID sort of really killed the Workforce Investment Board. So we brought it back a couple years ago, and we were lucky enough to apply and receive funding from the U.S. Department of Labor for a Workforce Opportunities in Rural Communities grant program. We got $1.25 million to invest in the Rutland region's workforce in the trades. So we have been working over the past year and a half to stand up this new program that we've just recently renamed and partnered with CEDAR on, the Chamber and Economic Development of the Rutland region, called Workforce in Motion. And many of you maybe saw the WCAX segment last week where the Regional Planning Commission and CEDAR convened almost 100 local employers and workforce developers to have a comprehensive discussion about how can we better collaborate and coordinate all the disparate workforce development efforts and work with our employers to fill these vacancies and have them be part of the process. So last year we had huge success partnering with CEDAR on this Bring Back the Trades event. Most of you probably heard about it. 2,200 students throughout Vermont met at Castleton for this huge workforce and trades event that was phenomenal. We heard from so many employers that this was huge, and it was new and it was sort of sponsored with Bring Back the Trades, so we don't have good data about how many jobs came out of that event. Well, we've learned from that opportunity. We've partnered with CEDAR on this new program called Workforce in Motion. So Workforce in Motion is this wraparound, peer-to-peer workforce development in Rutland region that has two components, the Academy and the Summit. So the Summit is going to be this, again, a huge event at Castleton University, bringing high school and middle school students together to try to give them experience and connect them directly with employers. And then hopefully also the academy, connect them with the academy. This is where the Regional Planning Commission is using that workforce development money to create a career pathways program, which is stood up now. It's working now. And we have information on our website about this, rutlandrpc.org, that has several different tracks from healthcare and LNA to CDL licensing to be your own boss to construction 101. There's many offerings that this is free to give you training and connect you directly with employers so that hopefully at the end of it, you walk away with a job and some real skills. Because we know that without doing this work, if we just continue with status quo, we're losing ground. And there's huge opportunities in here, and we can't build those 5,000 and 9,000 houses without somebody with a hammer, and we know that we need to grow this construction and trades industry because, as you pointed out, that 40 is the new 60. Well, the average age of a contractor in Vermont is 60. So, we've got 10 years maybe to really fill this gap, or else we are going to be in serious trouble. So, this is the first step. We would like this program to be sustainable and long-term. So we're trying to work with Cedar to make that happen. But it's exciting. The overwhelming response we've heard from employers and students is really, really positive. Same with schools. We had funding and we were going to provide busing to the event last year, and schools were so interested in it. They're like, that's okay. We can fund it. We'll make it happen because we believe in this. Because frankly, in Vermont, we have no coordinated career development curriculum in our schools. We just don't. Yep. We have our technical centers, which are amazing. They're doing all the work, but, Stafford, who is incredible, has to turn away students because they just don't have the capacity.
Yeah, they're full. Yeah.
So how can we fill that gap, especially for kids that didn't get into Stafford, wanted a classical experience, but don't want to go to college, which is half of Rutland County. They don't go to college. What are we doing with those kids?
Yep. We talked with both Lyle Jepson, and I'll get to his appointment on the ladder up, and Crispin White when they were here last time, I think, or maybe the time before, about that jobs event, Bring Back the Trades. And I said at the end that I was hoping that it would outgrow Castleton's ability to host it. And they both looked at me and sort of grinned and said, we kind of have the same feeling.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it's going to move to the Rutland Fairgrounds or where, but I think that maybe it'll be another year at Castleton. That's great. And nothing against Castleton University, trust me. But you need a place where you can get a whole bunch of people together. So if it winds up someplace else, I think that's great too.
Or like maybe a northern and a southern, chapter, or whatever it is. Yeah, we want to grow this. We ultimately want Workforce in Motion to cover all of Vermont.
Yeah.
End to end, and be comprehensive and include every employer and student that wants to be involved. And it's funny because I think at this point employers are desperate and see the writing on the wall. They're willing to put their money where their mouth is and actually invest in their workforce because they know without it they're dead in the water. They're not going to be able to grow their business and earn money and be financially viable. So I'm excited. This is a really cool space for us to be in the collaborative nature, working with Cedar and all our partners. That's the magic more than anything. So, yeah. We
were very sad, at least I was, on a personal note, to see Lyle Jepson promoted. He's now the commissioner of the Economic Development Committee, or
Department of Economic Development.
Yep. So he had to leave Cedar to do that. He's still living in Rutland, and he made a big point about saying that he was not going to move up to Montpelier. He's still here, but he's going to drive up and back every day and still be able to get involved with local activity. But he's also probably the perfect person that the governor could have tapped to do this job. So we certainly wish Lyle the best. I know Cedar will be announcing another director or chief executive officer at some point. We did speak with Crispin White. Actually, was at the mixer, and then he came in and gave us a check from the mixer to the radio station for the Christmas fund last week. And I maybe a lot of other people had sort of assumed that he might be the next guy, but he made a very, I thought, important point. He says, it's just not me. I don't want to be in a meeting every day, day after day after day.
Yeah.
I like to get out on the street and get stuff done and meet people and interact with them. So it won't be Crispin. I don't know who it's going to be, but I'm sure there'll be an announcement here soon on that.
Yeah, big shoes to fill. I mean, Lyle is in a league of his own.
Yeah.
And I'm personally close with Lyle, and our close working relationship. We really have aligned our organizations well to achieve similar ultimate goals. But you're right. There's no one better for this position, and frankly, it's going to benefit Rutland. Finally, we have an advocate up there.
Exactly.
And I think we're often lost in the fray, but now I feel like we really have a voice. And, not to say that we're going to get preferential treatment, but we'll at least get equal treatment. And I'm excited to see that collaborative, outgoing nature that Lyle brings to everything to that department, because there's huge potential, especially with Chip, which falls under his department, which is that I am of course blanking on the acronym.
I'm calling it project-based TIFs.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
It's housing investment program that is a project-based TIF, and it's Rutland City obviously just successfully established their very own TIF district. But for all those communities that don't want a huge TIF district, they really just need it for one specific project. This is going to be huge. This is $200 million a year over the next 10 years. That's $2 billion invested in Vermont's housing through housing and mixed-use development. And I know in our region, Fairhaven was the poster child for this law. The governor came down, signed it into law with Joe Gunter, the town manager of Fairhaven, because they have huge housing potential. That old racetrack on south side of Fairhaven has water and sewer. It's flat. It's super developable. Let's get housing in there. So they're one of those communities that stands to benefit from this Act 250 reform. So we are actually excited about CHIP. We are hosting a town manager administrator roundtable with Lyle and the CHIP team and the VEPSI executive director next month to try to get as much information out to our towns as possible so they can start to get ready, because frankly, this has hit the ground running. Projects that are shovel ready are going to get priority funding. Luckily we have 10 years, but still it's an act now process. So I'm hoping to reconvene the select board meetup in January as well and have this be the topic of that discussion. And we as a regional planning commission can really help with technical assistance and ultimately project development. Get these conceptualized projects to that shovel-ready stage through engineering and planning and all the rest, so towns can go and just get the benefit, get it built, and add what you mentioned earlier, which is desperately needed grand list tax revenue, so we can reduce the taxes in this massive affordability issue that we're facing right now in Vermont.
We're talking with Devon Neary, who's the executive director of the Rutland Regional Planning Commission. I'm Brian Collamore, and it's funny, this will be easily transferred to the next topic I wanted to talk about, and that's taxes. So we have, over the summer, seen the task force, which was charged with coming up with recommendations and maps of potential school districts. And the second part of that, the school district maps, did not happen. The task force has not come up with those, but they did come up with some recommendations, and I'm sure that it will be the ability of both the Education and House Education Committees to take a look at those recommendations and then come up with their suggestions and drafts of legislation that would further change, I think, both the way we govern our educational system and certainly, and just as importantly, how we pay for it. And so we have, the governor came up with 5 districts. And I know that he didn't, in his heart of hearts, ever expect that we would say, oh, that's a great idea, Governor. Yeah, let's do that. That was not what we came up with. The Senate version of the bill came up with a little bit more of a district number. Theirs was more like 12, 13, 14 districts around the state with varying degrees of administration cuts and savings therein, we hope. And I realize that means some people aren't going to do the same job they had when this all comes to pass. And I get that. And, of course, you begin to talk, too, about the inevitability, and I don't necessarily think it's the legislature's job to consolidate schools, to merge them, to force people into doing that. I think the local populace should always have the say about how that happens. We've got 7 high schools in the county, and I think most people would agree, don't have enough kids in those 7 high schools to sort of keep going the way we are. If we had twice the number of students, we'd be in a lot better shape, because guess what? The property tax bill would be spread out over more families. But the letter that came out December 1st from the tax commissioner indicated that statewide, on average, this doesn't mean everybody's going to get a 12% increase, but on average, and to be fair, it was 11.9%, so it was close enough to 12% to round it up, that there'd be a 12% increase in most people's property taxes, at least on average. Well, in order to get that bought down, which is what we did last year, we came up with $111 million, I think. It might have been a little bit, 114. I don't know what the exact number was anymore. But we spent that to, in essence, buy the property tax down, and we got it down to about 1% on average. Again, some communities were under that. They actually had a lower property tax. Some were about the same. Mine in Rutland Town was about the same, maybe a little bit higher. But actually, no, I think Rutland Town went down a little bit.
Yeah, it did.
And so there's the question, what are we going to do with it? Are we going to somehow find another $100 million to buy that down? Or are we going to just say, sorry, that's the way it's going to be? Because passing a budget this year is going to be very challenging. If we do buy that down by somehow finding that 111, it's all one-time money. That's the other thing. It doesn't mean that next year we won't be facing the same problem again. But if we don't do that, there won't be much left over to do anything else in terms of social programs. So we're going to have a very challenging budget year, I think. And I don't know how it's going to go. I'm trying to keep as open a mind as I can about whether we close any high schools. And again, I think for the most part, in most people's minds, it's the high school level that we're talking about in many cases. I didn't hear anybody say we should never have any more small elementary schools anymore. We should just make them all drive 5 hours to Burlington.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody has said that. So, you take the 3, I think, elementary schools, then middle school, and then high school. And I think the high school is where we'll probably find the most agreement that in order to do something that makes more sense, that's where we'll do it. The middle school, maybe a little bit. And then I don't think I want to change anything about elementary schools. I think those are the ones that the community comes together on. And the high schools do, to be fair. I mean, I've used this example before. I lived in West Rutland for 25 years. And the other school, which is not that far away, a few miles, is Proctor. And for you to begin to talk about Proctor and West Rutland getting together, that's civil war.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work out very well. I don't know what the answer is. I really don't, but I'm willing to listen.
Yeah, this is not a space that regional planning commissions are currently working in, but it indirectly, absolutely, right? And for us, we recognize that exactly what you said, small community schools are the heartbeat and the lifeblood of some of these communities. It is the community center. It's where you vote. It's where a town meeting is held. It's all these things. And, if you strip that away, along with a lot of rural businesses closing, what is left? That is the heart and soul of the community. And in our region, we just saw this. Danby Courier Memorial School is closed.
Right.
And I've spoken with folks in town. They understand, like, the school was small. The enrollment was declining, but they are not happy with this decision to close this school. Where we come into play and where we've had success is working with communities to reimagine and reuse schools that have closed. Castleton is a great example where their middle school was consolidated into Fairhaven Union High School, and now it's their rec department, and things are really successful over there in the short term, and hopefully in the long term as well with standing up this new rec program. But I've heard different models from sort of this tech center based model where the districts are around our STEs, and that sounds like something worth pursuing. But this is I don't envy any of you for having to deal with this monumental issue. It's a problem, and I get the urgency. The budget concern for me is bigger in the immediate, because I think, based on the legislative budget forecast meeting a couple of weeks ago, this may be the worst outlook we've ever seen for funding shortfalls based on federal changes. And those federal changes aren't totally understood yet.
Right.
If healthcare subsidies lapse and Medicaid continues to be cut, we are in serious trouble. I spoke with VTrans the other day about just paving and roadway projects, and they are pulling back drastically because they just don't have the money. They basically have the program filled for the next decade already with current projects. That means we're not adding anything new. We don't have money to do that. Locally, we've had to make some really tough decisions with our own public transit provider. There's huge funding gaps, and we're going to have to cut back some service temporarily to shore up these funding gaps. And our older adults and persons with disabilities program, which is the biggest in Vermont, by the way, we have over 1,000 riders. That program's getting cut down as well, from what I hear, based on federal funding. So, I think we can dream and hope that the state is always going to fill the gap, but we're having our own issues. We can't fill this gap all the time. So we really have some tough decisions ahead. And, I have full confidence that you and the Rutland delegation will be there to meet that challenge and really advocate on behalf of our community. So thank you for that.
I do want to mention, we need to take our second break here. The school boards in Rutland County, for the most part, have been extremely responsible in the way that they have fashioned their school budgets. I'm not saying that they're out of control with spending at all. In fact, if anything, I know, for instance, I was over to Fairhaven High School last week, and we were talking about this foundation formula where each school will get a certain amount of money per student, and what we passed in that bill was $15,033, if I'm remembering correctly. And Fairhaven is at $11,000. So they're actually more fiscally responsible than what came out of that. But on the other hand, again, I hate to always pick on Chittenden County, but there are schools up there that are spending $25,000, $28,000 a student. So I don't know where we are with that, but I just wanted to mention, I didn't mean to make it sound like Rutland County was just throwing money away and spending all kinds of things.
They're as lean
for
as
sure.
it gets, yeah.
All right. Devon Neary from the Rutland Regional Planning Commission, and I will be back after our second break here on Catamount Community Connection. Welcome back to Catamount Community Connection. I'm Brian Collamore. We're talking to Devon Neary today from the Rutland Regional Planning Commission, and our show is brought to you by the Rutland County Agricultural Society, which has brought you the Vermont State Fair in Rutland since before the Civil War. The 180th Vermont State Fair is on the horizon. I know it sounds like a long way away, August of 2026, but it will be here before you know it. And again, I want to thank them for their continued support of the program. So we've talked a lot about some of the changes that we might be seeing with a few tweaks, if you will, to Act 181, which was a revision of the original Act 250. We talked about congratulating Lyle Jepson for his promotion as a commissioner at the state level. And then I talked a little bit about the funding and budget issues that I can see on the horizon, and also the issues with our educational system and how to sort of fix that. I also, by virtue of the fact that I chair the Government Operations Committee in the Senate, found myself by default as the chair of the Governance Committee that had started a couple years ago. Matt Byrong, who's my counterpart in the House, he and I are the co-chairs of that. And there was a report that was actually due last month in November with respect to what had been accomplished so far. The problem was that the committee didn't meet. I think they met twice, maybe 3 times, and then stopped meeting. The election of 24, unfortunately, 2 of the people I think that were on that committee were not reelected, so they were gone. And they were both in the House. So the Speaker of the House had been unable to appoint anybody new, and that's what was holding up the process. So we haven't met. We did meet a couple weeks ago and just pushed the date for that report to be due out further into 26. And we will be meeting during the session. I don't know what we'll be able to accomplish, but the idea is, again, without adding anything to the budget, and that's the important part, you can't create new positions and keep adding to the budget. But if we could figure a way for municipalities to share costs, share efficiencies across county lines, or however you want to do it, I'd certainly be willing and welcome with that.
Yeah, we're right there with you. This is something that VAPTA and regional planning commissions have been researching and discussing now for several years. And there were attempts in the past, but it just wasn't the right time. I think it is the right time in that I know for certain that myself and any of my colleagues at the regional planning commission level have no interest in pursuing any regional governance that adds another layer of bureaucracy and doesn't create savings. If this is all about efficiency and reducing taxes by making it easier for us to share staffing, services, and group purchasing at the minimum. There are other models throughout the nation and even New England that have proved super valuable, especially in Massachusetts and Connecticut with the Council of Governments, which really is just your local select board chair sits on a board with all the other select board chairs in a specific geographic region, whether it's county or otherwise, and you decide, and it's county by county, like what is the most important things for you to do together, because right now it is cumbersome. You have to start your own municipality. There's complex memorandums involved, and there's legal sort of jujitsu to get these where it needs to be. We need to make it simple and easy and predictable so that, a town like a great example is, we're discussing this at a select board meetup earlier in the year. I think it was April or March of 25. And it just struck me. The select board chair for Middletown Springs, Herb Childress, said, I just don't understand. Middletown Springs with 900 people has 60 municipal positions, from health inspector to dog warden, fire warden, select board, and planning commission. Why does every town need this position over and over and over again? And it's a great question. And why does every single town need to buy their salt and sand on a singular contract? We need to reduce these barriers. And I think this will hit at the heart of the affordability issue. And it's rural equity at its heart. Every town expected to do this over and over again. It's not equitable for Benson and West Haven to have the same municipal capacity as Fairhaven and Brandon, right? So maybe by sharing some of these things, we can build everybody's capacity up to an equal standard that, delivers better services to residents and reduces costs to the tax base ultimately. So, we're excited about this. We did submit a proposal to UVM Leahy Institute to try to get a grad assistant to study this and produce a model so that you all at the legislature can react to something. We weren't successful in getting the full UVM research team behind us, but it looks like we're going to get somebody this summer to do some work for us. we did a bunch of research last year with the National Association of Development Organizations, NATO, to sort of lay out who is a good model and who should we be talking to and how is it working mechanically. Because the other aspect to this that really is not well understood is in Connecticut, they petitioned the federal government to recognize these COG districts as counties so that when there's direct appropriations federally to county levels, they get the money. Right now in Vermont, we do not get the money.
No, we don't.
So that is a huge missed opportunity. So, there's multiple layers here. And again, like it's complex and nuanced. But if we're not all targeting that ultimate goal of reducing costs and making things easier and improving services, then I don't want to be a part of it. That is the goal. That should be the goal.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens. We'll, as I say, be meeting during the session and find out how we can make it happen. I mean, Florida is organized by county. It's pretty simple down there. Mm-hmm. The sheriff is the big guy, mm-hmm. and the state police really don't do the same things that the sheriffs do here.
Right.
It's sort of the other way around. So, yeah, just one example. Well, Devon, we've run out of time, but I really appreciate seeing you again. Thank you for your time and attention today. We'll definitely have you back on soon.
Appreciate it, Brian, and good luck this session. And thank you for all the effort you and the other delegates put in for us. So
all right.
Have a great holiday season.
Thank you. You too. And we'll see all of you next week here on Catamount Community Connection.